Hello. The topic today is regulatory compliance, and especially the way how MidPoint can support regulatory compliance. First of all, we will have a look at some regulations, regulations and standards that are influencing the landscape. Then we will have a look how MidPoint features, especially policy rules, can help with enabling a regulatory compliance. And then we will have a short demo. Let's start with regulation and standards. Regulatory landscape is quite broad. There is a couple of international standards in this field, but especially the big states, the big nations are bringing their own regulations and standards to the field. Lately, especially European Union went into something like European legislative hailstorm with creating a lot of laws, regulations, and directives in such a fast sequence that even the member state of European Union have trouble catching up. There are also American regulations that are different from European, of course. We will not go too deeply into all these regulations and standards. We will have quite a closer look into just few of them. First of all, it's international standard ISO 27001, and then European regulations NIS2 and DORA. First of all, the international standard 27001. It is a standard. That means it is not mandatory to follow. It is more or less just a recommendation. However, it is based for many other regulations and mandatory practices. ISO 27001 is a nice standard, because nice from our point of view, because it's quite technological standards. There are 93 concrete controls to be applied by the organizations. It is risk-based. That means that the depth of application of the controls depends on your specific situation and your risk. And as I said, it is referenced by other specifications, especially European NIS2 and US Cybersecurity framework. We have had a closer look at ISO 27001 in Evolveum. As you may have probably noticed, there were some webinars last year. And we conducted a research of ISO 27001, and for each control in this standard, we have written down a description how MidPoint can be used to support that control. Of course, not all of the controls are replicable. There are some physical security controls, for example, that MidPoint cannot help with. MidPoint cannot help you with the locks and the bars and armed guards, of course. But with pretty much other controls, MidPoint can help you to some extent. This documentation is available on our website, and you can see the URL in the presentation. We have also created a statement of applicability of ISO 27001. Statement of applicability in this form is a spreadsheet that describes the individual controls of ISO 27001, and then links them to MidPoint features that are supporting that. This statement of applicability can be used to make your audits and your own evaluation of MidPoint deployments faster. Our evaluation had resulted in some kind of description of how MidPoint features can help with regulatory compliance, and you can pretty much see that almost more than half of ISO 27001 controls can be supported by MidPoint. 19% of these controls, which means 18 controls, are for these are deployment of MidPoint or a similar technology is necessary. That means that if you have a larger deployment, identities at scale, then you will need some kind of automation that MidPoint or similar products provide. You can see the details either in the statement of applicability or in the documentation on our website. Let's talk about NIS2 for a while. NIS2 is a directive of European Union that specifies cybersecurity requirements for member states. NIS2 is a directive as opposed to regulation. Directives needs to be transposed to national law. NIS2 is not that technical. It is a legislation in the strong meaning of the word. So it's a law. That means there is quite a few technical details. But for example, identity and access management is explicitly mentioned there in one of the recitals. As needs to be transliterated to national law, that means that each member state needs to update its legislation to match with NIS2. As you can see on the right-hand side, there is a map of European Union. The states shown in blue have already transliterated the directive. The states shown in red have not yet done so. Therefore, you can pretty much see that the uptake of NIS2 legislation is not that good as we would probably like to. The legislation should be already effective by October 2024, and then, as you can see, it is not even enacted in quite a lot of member states. Therefore, for the real effects of NIS2, we will probably need to wait a little bit longer. Now, let's talk about MidPoint, how MidPoint can support regulatory compliance. First of all, the MidPoint is a tool for identity governance. That's something like a superpower of MidPoint. And we hope that we can make MidPoint come pre-configured with compliance rules, with compliance configuration. There is one word of warning. MidPoint cannot be compliant with most of the standards and regulations directly because MidPoint is a product, it is a software. Most of the standards and regulations are targeted at organizations. So, for example, only organization can be compliant with ISO 27001. MidPoint cannot because it is not an organization, it is a product. But MidPoint can help you, help your organization to become compliant, and the help can be quite substantial. We will be creating a configuration that will pre-configure for you dashboards and reports and rules that are aligned with the regulations and standards. And as well, we will provide a documentation that describes how you should configure MidPoint to support your compliance. Let's talk a bit about identity governance. Most of you are probably used to identity management, which is a science and an art of controlling access and controlling the identities, the identity attributes, and synchronization of data across systems and so on. On the other hand, identity governance is more about high-level policies, about business-oriented policies. Whereas identity management asks a question, who has access to what? Identity governance is more concerned with the question, why users have access to that place or this place. Also, identity governance is concerned about the responsibility, about the question of who is responsible for this particular object. For example, who is an owner of a role or owner of an application. So it is about high-level policies, more business-oriented policies. The governance takes care of the fact that that everything should be cared for, everything should be maintained, and especially the configuration that I will show later is focused on making sure that every important object has an owner. The mechanism to implement these kind of rules is based on features that were introduced into MidPoint in the last couple of years. You may have noticed that we have now a new object type policy. The policy type, it is meant to group policies or rules into objects that can be understood by business. These policy objects contain individual policy rules. And the individual policy rules check for specific technical aspects in a MidPoint. For example, they can check that some type of objects has at least one owner. They can also check for attributes and state changes and so on. So there may be quite a complex set of policy rules to implement one business policy. These policy rules are setting marks on object. Mark is also one of the newer features of MidPoint that is used to mark an object that is particularly interesting in this case. In this case, we will mark objects that are violating certain policy. For example, a policy for orphaned applications, for applications without owner, will use a policy rule that will mark the applications that do not have an owner. Set the mark. And then the mark can be used in a variety of ways. It can be displayed on dashboard, it can be used in reports, it can be used in search panels, in user interface, it can be used as a basic for reviews for certification campaigns. So there is one unified policy that sets the mark, and the mark is used by a number of reporting and activity features of MidPoint. We are working on a set of marks and policy rules that will be pre-configured in MidPoint. You will see in the demo there are marks for orphaned applications and roles, roles that are understaffed. That means that do not have proper staffing, do not have enough people in them. There is marks and also policies for privileged roles. And if you've been on webinars last year, you probably remember classifications. So these are incorporated into these mechanisms as well. One of the nice results of this configuration is a compliance dashboard. So there is a dashboard configured in MidPoint, which shows the basic overview of your compliance with the policies that are applied in MidPoint. There is a clear color code. The blue panels are showing, they are just informational, they are just showing information. The green panels show aspects where you are compliant with the policy. Orange panels show a warning, and red panels means non-compliance with the policy. Now let's have a look at the demo. This demo is focused on enforcing high-level identity governance rules, such as making sure that every application has an owner, every role has an owner, every application has a classification. These rules are marking the violations, which is then tracked and it is displayed on a dashboard. Let's switch to MidPoint. This is an instance of MidPoint that have been somehow configured. So let us walk through the configuration. First of all, we will have a look at applications. We have several applications here configured, and this list of applications was also customized. Therefore, you can see owner and classification columns there. We have a policy set up to make sure that every application has an owner. But now you can see that this portfolio management application does not have an owner, and the policy is marking the application as orphaned. Then there is a classification of the application. Classifications, in simple words, classification means a designation how sensitive the data in the application are. And again, we have a policy to make sure that every application has a classification, but this one does not. It was not classified yet. Therefore, it is again marked as violation of the policy. Classifications are part of MidPoint for some time, And you can see a list of classifications here. Classifications are one subtype of the policy object that I was mentioning earlier. You can see these classifications that mark the sensitivity of the applications. But classifications do not need to be applied only to applications, that can be applied to everything. Therefore, we have two classifications that can be applied to roles. For example, we can mark roles with a privileged access. And now let's have a closer look into how it works. Let's have a look at application roles. And you can see that few of the roles have been marked as privileged access. These are usually administrative roles. Therefore, we can have overview. We can list all the roles that are giving privileged access like that. However, if you have a closer look, you can see that there is one administrative role, public website administrator, that is not yet marked as privileged, and it probably should be because it's administrative role. And this is a good opportunity to show you how the privileged access classification works. So there is this applicable policies panel in a MidPoint that was there for many years, but it is rarely used. And this is a good demonstration how this panel should be used. Therefore, I have configured this panel to provide a selection of various policies that can be applied to this particular role. So now I will be choosing privileged access classification as the policy to be applied to this administrative role. And I just save it. And now we can see that the role was marked. It is done in two steps. One step is that the classification privileged access is assigned to the role, and thus this classification has a policy rule that sets the mark. So both the classification and the mark are applied in this case. Therefore, now if we look at the list of privileged roles, we have all the privileged roles here. Now, this classification, this privileged access classification is really powerful. What we can do is set up a rule, a policy rule in this classification that marks the users that have privileged access. So now the users that have any of the privileged roles is marked as having a privileged access. Let's have a closer look at this George Green user. Let's see a list of George's roles. And you can see that, in fact, George does not have any of the privileged application roles, at least not directly. George has system administrator with the business role, which is a business role containing privileged access application roles. And even in this case, the user is marked as having privileged access. Therefore, it works transitively. This is a good tool to see which users have privileged access in your organization, and then use it, for example, in certification campaigns, where you will you could recertify, you could review the access of users with privileged access more often. All these policies are shown on the dashboard that I've been mentioning earlier. So you can see that this first line is all about applications, number of active applications, number of orphaned applications, which means applications without owner, number of applications without classifications, and so on. The next line is about roles, then the next line is about users, and the last line talks about specific roles that are marked as information security responsibilities, like roles that deserve special attention. Now we can click on, for example, on this orphaned application dashboard widget, and then we will see a list of applications that do not have owners. This can also be used in report, in a certification campaign, and so on. Now, let's get back to presentation and let's have a closer look on how this particular orphaned application configuration is applied. As I've been showing before, this configuration has three parts. One part is the configuration of policy rules. In this case, we want to apply the policy to all applications. Therefore, the more obvious place where to put this policy is the archetype for application. Archetype for application is something that applies to all the applications. Therefore, we are going to put policy rule inside there in the archetype in inducement. That means that this policy rule is not applied to archetype itself, it is applied to all the applications. And in this case, the policy is requesting for any application to have a minimal number of assignees, one, and the assignees should have relation over, which means this requires that each application must have at least one owner. In case that the policy rule is violated, then mark with this OID is set. And it is OID of orphaned mark. The orphaned mark looks like that. It is an object in a MidPoint that has some description. And it has archetype for object mark, and that's pretty much it. It's very, very simple object. Therefore, this policy rule in the archetype is setting the mark for all the applications that are violating the policy. Then we can use a query, MidPoint query, to look for all the objects that have this mark. The query looks like this. And then we can use the query, for example, in dashboard widget. In this case, we cannot use the query directly in the widget due to some technical limitations, but there is object collection that just contains the query. And we can use the object collection in the dashboard widget to display dashboard widget as you have seen before in the demo. The same collection or query can be used in reports, in certification campaigns, and so on. What we have seen in the demo so far. So we have seen a set of compliance rules in the demo. The demo was shown on MidPoint 4.10, the development version of MidPoint 4.10. Most of the rules will work also on earlier versions of MidPoint, but there are some issues that have been fixed so far only in the development version of MidPoint. You can see the entire configuration for this demo in MidPoint samples repository on GitHub. There is a MidPoint Studio project, and if you would like to try the project for yourself, there is a README file in the project with instruction how to apply the configuration. There is also documentation for sample configuration or the configuration that is used in the demo. The documentation is partial so far, but we will be updating that later this year. And part of this configuration will be provided as an out-of-the-box configuration in MidPoint 4.10 in a form of initial objects. What exactly will be in the initial objects, what parts will be there is still to be determined. However, you would still use the complete configuration by using the samples or MidPoint documentation. And there is one more news that I would like to share with you, and that is that MidPoint was awarded this label. It is a Cybersecurity Made in Europe label, and it is awarded to products that are both made in Europe and satisfy a set of cybersecurity requirement specified by the European Cybersecurity Organization, ENISA. MidPoint was awarded this label, which shows our commitment to adherence to European legislation, compliance with the European Legislative Act that apply to MidPoint as a product, such as Cyber Resilience Act and AI Act, but also our commitment to support your compliances, your organizations under the European legislation. It is also a label that shows our commitment to European digital sovereignty. MidPoint provides you ability to have your own deployment of identity governance, independent of American, Chinese, or any other vendors. Therefore, we have been talking about cybersecurity regulations, and there is a lot of cybersecurity regulations, both in Europe and US and around the world. And as cybersecurity is a major problem worldwide, it is quite likely that the cybersecurity regulations will get stronger over time, and they won't get any weaker. Therefore, if you want to apply cybersecurity regulations at scale, you need to automate. You need to automate parts of the compliance that can be automated. And identity management and identity governance is a very good spot for automation, because the identity governance system has quite a lot of information about users, and users are the prime focus of many of the regulations. Therefore, MidPoint can help with regulatory compliance. And we fully recognize that. And we have an ambition to make MidPoint to support you, to easier support you in your compliance out of the box. Therefore, we will be working on a reasonable initial configuration of MidPoint that can help you to reach your compliance easier. And as we are a European company, and we fully adhere to European legislation, we are also focusing on the compliance for European and international standards and legislation. That's all from my side, and thank you for your attention.